Numbers as related to man and the world. To the materialist, man is simply a physical organism, the supreme accomplishment of natural biology. Individuality is the result of a superorganic chemistry, and the individual but one of innumerable foci, established by energy for no particular reason upon the broad expanse of matter. As immortality has not been scientifically established, it is either denied or ignored. And turning to the problems of the external life, the mind becomes hopelessly enmeshed in the physical elements of being. To the religiously minded, man is a compound of spirit, soul, and body. Spirit is an extremely attenuated essence, an emanation from divinity, and partakes of the immortality of its own source. Soul is a grosser essence which, through mingling with the material universe, becomes so defiled that it is in danger of annihilation. Through piety and the precepts of the faith, the soul may be rescued from its predicament to become a sort of wedding garment in which the spirit may robe itself when functioning in the presence of the Creator. Body is an irrefutable evidence of carnal sin, the continual adversary of the spirit and its purposes. Some of the early Christians affirmed that the flesh of the redeemed would be resurrected upon the last great day, but this doctrine lost favor when subjected to a critical analysis. A few, however, still cling to it even in this age of comparative enlightenment. To the philosopher, man is a microcosm, that is, a miniature universe in which are mirrored the structure and activities of the entire sidereal system, working from the premise that a knowledge of the universe is necessary to the understanding of man, and conversely, that a knowledge of man is necessary to the understanding of the universe. The enlightened of all ages have recognized in the human constitution a textbook setting forth in simple and direct form the whole drama of existence. From those eminent authorities of the past to whom we are indebted for nearly all the fundamental principles of what we term knowledge, we can learn much of first importance regarding the constitution of man. India, China, Persia, Egypt, and Greece are of one accord in their secret doctrine. It is impossible in a brief article to examine critically their profound and complicated systems. Suffice it to say that symbols were employed to represent the various departments of the soul, and that the Greeks, concealing their whole metaphysical system under the science of mathematics, chose numbers as the vehicles of their abstract ideas. Several systems branched off from the mathematical philosophy of the Pythagoreans, and these, functioning in specialized fields, have contributed confirmatory evidence from their own spheres of experience. Socrates realized that man is the most imminent mystery and that each of us must stand dumb with wonder in the midst of the miracle of his own self. Thus, to this age, many of the deepest truths in nature are shadowed forth through the numerical symbolism of the ancients. As an old Pythagorean might have said, numbers evoke from the soul that reflects upon the mysteries the several realities for which they stand. To the philosophers, numbers were magicians continually invoking facts by their ever-potent charms. The purpose of this article is to consider briefly how the Pythagoreans applied numbers to the occult anatomy of man, so that each of the numerals became significant of some divine reality. Through meditating upon the mystery of numbers, knowledge was increased, arrangements and proportions made evident, and most obscure secrets clarified. As Albert Pike has said, the science of numbers represented not only arithmetical qualities, but also all grandeur, all proportion. By it we necessarily arrive at the discovery of the principle or first cause of things, called at the present day the Absolute. Number 10 must always stand for the wholeness or completeness of man, for his parts are diagrammatically revealed in the mysterious Pythagorean pyramid of 10 dots, the tetractys. The 10 is referred to as the number of the world because the cipher which signifies the creation is of no value unless it is preceded by the 1, the symbol of the ever-present divinity. The cipher, therefore, becomes the symbol of a mirror in which the 1, reflecting itself, establishes the world. In man, the 1 is the spirit and the cipher the body, the two extremes between which stand in concatenated order the other numerals as steps or rungs upon a ladder. Number 9 was declared by the Pythagoreans to be the symbol of mankind to indicate that all humanity falls short by one numeral of the whole perfection. It is the number of the prenatal epoch and also of the mysteries, and its form is that of a human embryo. It was declared by the ancients to signify the mystery of religion, and strangely enough, in astrology the 9th house is the house of religion. It may be regarded as the 9 inferior Sephiroth, as yet not reunited with the crown, or the most holy one. Number 8 was called by Pythagoras the little holy number and referred to as the number of the wise men. The 8 is the soul of the 7 and is therefore the number of the personality, which is the chemical compound created by the blending of the 7 planetary impulses. It is the 8th god above and the 8th world below. It is the number of our sun, which is declared to have been not of the sacred 7, but to have been one left out. Number 7 is one of the most significant. It stands for the builders, or more correctly, for the wholeness of that power of which the builders are the fractional parts. The builders are technical 6 parts of the 7, the remaining 1, or unity, being that by which all are bound together. Hence, the mystery of the 7th day in which no creative work was accomplished, but which was the rest after labor. The 7 not only signifies the active agencies which conspire to precipitate the mortal personality, but in the human body is the sacred number of the heart, which contains 6 chambers bound together by the wholeness of the organ itself. Number 6 reminds the student that the Elohim, or builders, are seated in the 6 directions of space as described in the Sefer Yetzirah, and that the 7th, or the Holy One, was throned in their midst. This mystery is shadowed forth in the sun and the 6 attendant planets known to the ancients. The 6 is furthermore a symbol of body because it is the number of the surfaces of a cube, and the cube is the symbol of matter because it rests upon a surface, whereas the sphere is the symbol of spirit because it rests upon a point. Number 5 invokes to the mind of the philosopher the shadow of the elements, the 4 grosser of which are suspended in the 5th, or intangible ether. The 5 likewise becomes the symbol of the soul, in that the soul is an ethereal matter, being the 5th, or quintessence, of the body. The 5 is also the symbol of marriage and the hermetic union because to the Pythagoreans it was the first combination of an odd and an even number, the 2 and the 3, negative and positive. Number 4 reveals the mystery of the 4 worlds in which creation takes place and of the 4 lesser elements which are united in the compounding of bodies. The 4 is also the symbol of the demiurgus, or builder, the god of the inferior world. In man, the 4 reveals the sacred square consisting of the mental, emotional, vital, and physical natures. Number 3 signifies the hypostasis of the creative force, the trinity not only of the Christians but also of the enlightened pagans. It was declared by the Pythagoreans to be the first number, as it was the manifested pattern of the divine purpose. In the body, it corresponds to the 3 major divisions, the heart, the brain, and the generative system as the thrones of the 3 logi. Number 2 witnesses the first division by which, in order to manifest as particulars, generals, principles, must first separate and by dividing themselves against themselves and opposing themselves to themselves, spin the web of being between their poles. To the Pythagoreans, the 2 was not a number because, like the sperm and the ovum for which it stood, it was not apparent in the objective structure but pertained to the sphere of principles. Number 1 is the immovable first cause through the permanence of which all realities are assured. The 1 is the spirit which not only is in heaven but is itself heaven and includes the inferior worlds within its own nature. Philosophically considered, the 1 is no number, but simply a witness of the eternal state, which is God. Occultism in America. This is the first of a series of short articles intended for the protection of that large body of people who are seeking through the various departments of metaphysics for a more rational solution to the problems of life. An explorer, when entering into an uncivilized country, contemplates not only the beauties of the new land, but also seeks to inform himself concerning the hazards of the enterprise. It is not our purpose to be unduly critical or to depreciate in any way constructive effort or the works of honest men. Our sole desire is to warn the beginner in occultism of the deceptions which are practiced in this field. It is quite useless to deny the existence of fraud in matters of religion. The faithful have had their gullibility strained to the breaking point since the beginning. When Aristotle declared that all men naturally desire to know, he proclaimed a common weakness by an admission of universal ignorance. Today, Tibet is an excellent example of a state impoverished by the Church. There are so many monks and abbots in this country that there are scarcely enough farmers left to supply the monasteries with food. Spring has come. Birds of various kinds are now migrating. The annual influx of itinerant metaphysicians may be looked for shortly. The field of popular psychology with its assorted isms is not what it used to be. 10 years ago, fortunes were made in a few months, but the tactics employed were so high-handed that even slow-thinking provincials have grown weary. With each passing year, the gyps are modified to meet the popular fancy. Finding that flagrant methods no longer succeed, the charlatan refines his technique, but he still uses the old reliable bait. As long as people believe that they can get spiritual without becoming spiritual, they must continue to pay and pay heavily for the fallacy of their belief. If every student contemplating taking a course instruction in the development of any of the several parts of his inner nature, or is on the verge of affiliating with somebody of self-denominated elected souls, will give careful attention to the material which follows, he may save himself time, money, disillusionment, and possibly more serious disaster. Not a few sincere but sentimental people have impoverished themselves, hazarded the futures of their families, and wasted the best years of their own lives in ill-advised attempts to attain that rather abstract state of commonly denominated spirituality. And strangely enough, hardly any of these people can give even a hazy definition of what the word spiritual means. They're all aiming at points in the dark. Stenographers, clerks, shopkeepers, a vast host of persons whose occupations are classified as housewives, and well-meaning old ladies on pittances attempt to buy soul growth at from $10 to $100 per class. Some of these never wake up, but the more discerning come to the conclusion after the money is spent that the perfectly gorgeous man who was teaching them had revealed nothing that they could not have found in the free public library with a few hours' research. Hope springs eternal, however, and even unto the 77th time these optimists pay to be deceived, always vainly hoping that this time the priceless secret will be revealed. As one old lady once said, after the denouement, "I do not see how he could have been such a cheat. He had such beautiful eyes." As we watch the steady stream of gullible people who literally stumble over each other in a frantic effort to pour their hard-earned cash into the bulging coffers of the metaphysical racketeers, there is but one inevitable conclusion. P.T. Barnum was right. As long as there are human beings, so long there will be foolish human beings. And as long as there are foolish human beings, they will be fleeced by smart human beings. And what David Starr Jordan calls the higher nonsense will be a lucrative profession and flourish upon the earth. During 10 years of public work, the writer has contacted, either directly or through their students, most of the metaphysical celebrities. Through these contacts, many startling and tragic facts have become evident. The overwhelming majority of these so-called teachers were just plain fakes, their pretensions utter falsehoods, and their teachings worthless if not positively dangerous. From among this collection can be selected as fine an assortment of rogues as were ever assembled to a common purpose: the exploitation of the public. Did they not mask their activities behind the cloak of religion, not a few of them would be serving prison sentences for various forms of delinquency. This is not an effort to be malicious, but to state facts as they are. We desire to render available to students of occultism in general such facts as should be in the possession of every thinking person for their protection and guidance. Seekers after truth come to me every day asking my advice, particularly as to which of these itinerant metaphysical carpetbaggers they should follow. There's nothing left to do but to analyze in the light of reason and of common sense the claims of these assorted sophists. We say sophists with full realization of the implication. The Sophists were a group despised in ancient Greece because they sought to peddle the sacred traditions for an exorbitant fee. An analysis of the whole situation reveals striking incongruities. Isis never unveils herself to the profane. Wisdom is always modest and not a little reluctant to reveal itself. Never in the history of time has truth ridden on the bandwagon. Like Buddha returning to the city of his father, it comes in obscurely by the back way, barefoot and with a pilgrim's staff. A careful analysis of the literature with which the modern seer heralds his approach and recounts his excellence impresses one with the fact that he just knows more than there is to know. Even God would be abashed at seeing so much of himself in one place. The would-be parlor adept has bad taste in his advertising, and bad taste is never a byproduct of good judgment. But to this heartless analysis, someone will say, "But our dear leader, Professor Blitz, is not a bit like that. He is so advanced and self-sacrificing. He hasn't had a commercial hair on his bald head. The $10 million he accumulated in the last 3 years was just through the realization of divine abundance." We like to be patriotic even to our follies. Let us now introduce to you a person whom we shall call the Professor. Like Barnum's great What Is It?, the Professor is a composite created by blending together the personalities of several of our leading dispensers of soul culture. He may seem to some only the caricature of a man, but those who have paid and paid and paid will recognize him as all that remains when his glamour and glitter have faded and his foam has evaporated. This is the statement of things as they really are when dissected as to the substance and motive. Upon his arrival in the new community, this professor of the new and wonderful, lacking originality, will follow an old and well-established custom. He will announce a series of extraordinary and incomparable free public lectures. As the American public is hopelessly sold to the idea of something for nothing and perfectly willing to pay for it, a fair crowd generally assembles and listens with open-mouthed rapture while the professor weaves a web. Mysterious hints and strange promises break down the financial resistance, and the audience is swept into the private classes en masse. The very private and the very esoteric classes constitute the one great chance of a lifetime. And the price, never again will they be so cheap. The exact fee depends upon whether the professor is working on the quantity or quality basis. If the former, the charge will range from $25 to $50 for approximately 10 awe-inspiring instructions on everything from hem-stitched breathing to the discovery of a soulmate. On the quality basis, the charge may run as high as $100, and it has been demonstrated even in periods of financial depression that the higher price set by the learned professor, the more anxious the public is to be initiated into his mysteries. The private class is often followed by a still more esoteric one, for the professor has no intention of permitting his disciples to depart as long as there is any possibility of further exploiting them. The very esoteric class is based upon the old circus psychology of picking up a few dimes at the conclusion of a main performance by announcing a Wild West show. If interest should lag, it may be whispered about. Secrets whispered to old students travel with great rapidity. That in this course the professor will reveal his great secret of financial success, or will sound the profundities of the sex problem. Either of these promised revelations brings the public in herds. Such promises are irresistible even to the so-called elect. Under the pledge of absolute secrecy and other marvelously impressive regulations, it may also be possible to purchase very advanced lessons never before revealed upon this planet, and never again to be revealed. We hope. The only chance to secure these instructions is to buy now at the ridiculously low figure of $25 for a dozen badly multigraphed and horribly punctuated revelations. Of course, there is an added charge if a diagram of the Kundalini is included. These diagrams usually indicate that the Kundalini got lost several times while wandering through the body. Just before departing, the professor may also initiate a few of his more advanced and wealthy pupils into a secret of cosmic importance. He has just purchased 64 acres of the choicest real estate in the southeast corner of the land of Timbuktu, where he's going to build a temple and start a free love cult for the propagation of advanced souls, who will completely revolutionize the entire social order. For $1,000 cash or easy terms, you may have your initials carved in the north wing of the professor's temple, and as an added inducement, a 1/1,000,000th interest in the possible or impossible oil and mineral rights. The professor will assure you, even with tears in his eyes, that you should not regard his offer as a business proposition, but as a spiritual opportunity in every sense of the word. If you hand him over all your available cash, you are not doing him a favor. You are simply contributing infinitely to the brilliance of your own halo. He is only the humble instrument whose life is devoted to giving mankind an opportunity to achieve. The professor further assures you that you are one of a chosen few. This is more truth than poetry. You have been handpicked out of the mob as one of the few persons in sight who are foolish enough to fall for the idea. Let us figure for a moment and see if we can understand the full measure of the dear professor's philanthropy, and what he really means when he says that after his vision in peculiar Missouri, he had dedicated himself to the unselfish service of mankind. A leading exponent in this field is capable of becoming an extremely wealthy man in a ridiculously short time with an absolute minimum of personal effort. The figures that follow are not exaggerated or in any way unreasonable. The professor in the course of a year is able to give at least 12 courses of lectures of the $50 variety. He is also able to give 12 very esoteric classes during the same period. As these, given 2 a night, take less than half a year, he will have at least 2 weeks of every month for public lectures, free except for collections, in order to excite interest in the gyp which is to follow. During the entire period, the professor will also sell his books, private lessons, personal advice, oil stock, chips off the philosopher's stone, temple bricks, world tours, etc. He may even take sufficient time off to cultivate a few silly old ladies who have more money than they know what to do with. If each of his $25 classes have 1,000 members, and several of the more expert of these professors have had as high as 2,000 in a single class, the income from these alone would be $300,000. Allowing all the other means of revenue, including the advanced classes, to balance his overhead and advertising expense, we have a man whose income is several times greater than that of the President of the United States. It is safe to say also that there have been in this country persons of this type who in the heyday of their glory had profits near $1 million a year. The exact amount of their finances will never be known, because while things go well, the professor is simply a businessman. But when an investigation of his affairs is instituted, he suddenly becomes very religious and blandly tells the authorities that his life and resources are secrets between himself and God. The astonishing part of the whole business is that most of these professors have nowhere nearly as sound a foundation in psychology as the average college sophomore. They have simply bought a little book, read it a few hours, and then gone forth capitalizing a gift of gab. Of course, all of the professors are not in the millionaire class, but nearly all of them are making a comfortable living on misrepresentation. They are just as surely parasites upon the social order as were the ignorantine friars of old. If you can afford to go to the professor and be initiated into his nonsense simply as a lark, or that you may study the gullibility of your fellow creatures, you may find his antics entertaining, and he may even accidentally pass on interesting thoughts which he has plagiarized from someone else. But any money that you have spent in an effort to be spiritually illumined by him you may consider wasted 100 cents on the dollar. The secrets of the soul are not bought, nor can they be sold, and any intimation to the contrary is untrue. The average citizen, by reading for half an hour every day from the writings of recognized authorities on whatever subject may interest him, will at the end of 6 months know more and have a more reasonable attitude than that of the average classmonger who is selling his wares to the American public. If we may be so bold, let us remind you that the term professor, when applied to these parlor psychologists, signifies one whose professions are without end, but who is never able to demonstrate what he professes. Speculations as to the nature of Pluto. Ancient astrologers achieved a very high degree of skill in prognostication without considering either Uranus or Neptune. Regarding the Sun and Moon as planets, The Chaldeans based their horoscopic calculations upon the aspects of 7 bodies in their relationship to the spot on Earth, where the native was born. The accuracy of astrology prior to the discovery of Uranus and Neptune indicates that these 2 planets were not essential factors in the reading of an ordinary horoscope. Their influence upon the ordinary individual was comparatively negligible. Within the last century, startling changes have taken place. Life has become much more intensive and complex than in earlier ages. We are daily confronted with problems beyond the wildest imaginings of the old stargazers. The Uranian qualities, for example, which were practically latent in the Egyptian, were released upon the world at about the time of the French Revolution. It has been well said that those forms of learning which are now the common property of man were once the most closely guarded secrets of the pagan priestcrafts. Thus, the Uranian and Neptunian influences were felt only within the temples of the mysteries, institutions dedicated to the sciences and philosophies which were under the particular patronage of these exalted rays. When science, philosophy, and occultism were released to the masses and became part of the lives of uncounted millions, new forces swayed society, and mankind in general came en rapport with the stars of the wise. Pluto, a dark, mysterious mass whirling on the newly established boundary of the solar system, has now been added to the planetary family. Astrologers everywhere are speculating as to the nature of the influences which Pluto will unloose upon mankind. Believing that there is a power which so firmly guides the destiny of the universe, we feel that the name Pluto was not given to this planet by accident. We affirm this even in the face of a general discontent, for many astrologers feel that a more elegant and optimistic title should have been chosen. No sooner had the planet been discovered than the whisper went around, "It must be the higher octave of something." There is just a question in my mind as to the utter validity of the octave theory. I think we shall find that these planets now referred to as octaves of lower planets have distinct individualities of their own. It has been suggested that Pluto was the higher octave of Mars. If it is demonstrated by experimentation and observation that Pluto has a martial spirit, it will probably be assigned a throne in the second half of the constellation of Scorpio. Regardless of whether it is accepted as an octave of Mars, we feel that its affinity to Scorpio is evident from all available information. Affirming that Pluto was probably better named than the average astrologer realizes, let us see what we can discover from the name which will help us to understand the nature. Pluto was the 3rd person of the inferior triad of the Roman divinities. The inferior or material universe was divided into 3 parts, of which the spiritual was ruled by Jupiter, the intellectual by Neptune, and the physical by Pluto. The great subterranean cavern in which Pluto held court simply signified the cavernous interior of the world egg. Although Pluto was popularly regarded as a god of death, he was in reality the regent of the physical universe and corresponded to the ego or incarnating soul of man. This ego holds court in the dark recesses of the physical body, even as Pluto dwelt in the gloomy depths of mortal natures. In Freemasonry, Pluto is a variation of Hiram the Builder. Therefore, in certain of his most secret mysteries, the death and resurrection of Pluto was celebrated. From the Egyptians, we can learn much. The Pluto of the Romans, having crossed into Egypt, was worshipped there in the form of Serapis, according to Julius Caesar. The Serapean cult in Egypt was not part of the early theology of the Egyptians, but flourished almost contemporary with Christianity. The Emperor Hadrian, in a letter to Servianus, declared that the worshippers of Serapis in Egypt were Christians, and that even the bishops of the church did honor to this god. Critical investigations reveals, therefore, that Serapis were recognized as a prototype of Christ. In his Gnostics and Their Remains, C.W. King observes, "There can be no doubt that the head of Serapis, marked as the face, is by a grave and pensive majesty supplied the first idea for the conventional portraits of the Savior. It thus appears that while to the ignorant multitudes Serapis or Pluto was held up as a symbol of sorrow and death, it was recognized by the initiated priests as figurative of resurrection and immortality. This is not the only example of deities whose inner meanings were reserved when exposed to the profane. In India, the god Shiva plays the dual role of destroyer and creator. The consistency of the position is only evident to the enlightened. Yet if we will think carefully, we will realize that every creator is a destroyer and every destroyer a creator. Remember the old truism, disintegration always takes place that reintegration may follow upon a higher level of manifestation. We realize even in daily life that we grow more rapidly through adversity, more than through success. The more we are opposed, the more certain we are of accomplishment. Serapis, the Alexandrian Pluto, was the god and patron of learning, and the Serapeum, in which stood the most famous of his images, also housed the famous Alexandrian Library, the greatest institution of learning ever raised by the pagan world. Approximately 385 A.D., Theodosius published his memorable edict ordering the destruction of the Serapeum. An incited Christian mob literally tore the building stone from stone, destroyed the books, and lighting such stuff as was inflammable, turned the whole edifice into the blazing funeral pyre of the sad-faced god. Serapis fell, and with him perished the wisdom of uncounted centuries. The question may be asked, why should a god of wisdom be also regarded as a god of death? Socrates, dying, ordered the sacrifice of a cock, which was the usual sacrifice of a neophyte entering the temple of the mysteries. It was written repeatedly and inferred time without end that the god of death was the custodian or keeper of the mysteries of life. In the New Testament it is declared that death is the last enemy to be overcome. Therefore death stands on the borderline between mortality and immortality. The philosophic death of the mysteries was the true gate of initiation. The illumined sages used terms borrowed from the outer life of man to symbolize the phases of his inner or spiritual consciousness. Serapis was, therefore, the god of the philosophic death, continually destroying the old and giving place to the new. He was the patron of all such forms of learning as contributed to the well-being of the human soul. As the patron of essential learning, Serapis was furthermore the guardian of the mystery schools, in fact, the personification of them. From this it may become evident why the initiation ceremony was given in crypts and vaults, and the very sanctuaries themselves were patterned after tombs. This was said to be because all who entered them died, for the man who came out after the ceremony was not the man who went in. He might appear to be of similar features and proportions, but his old self had died and a new and immortal self had taken its place. Even today, in certain of the Christian mystical institutions, entrance into holy orders is regarded as equivalent to death. Therefore, the brother leaves his name and personality behind him, and once within the cloister, is regarded as a person dead to and separate from all the concerns of outer life. Sometimes a nun taking the final orders in order to emphasize her separation from the world is actually placed in a casket, where her friends and relatives see her for the last time as though she were actually dead. From these suggestions, it will be evident how death was used to symbolize a new life in God. With Serapis, the mystery schools of the ancient world fell, destroyed by the ignorance of the mob. For 1,600 years, religious ignorance has reigned upon the earth. The philosophers, driven into cellars and garrets and persecuted by unenlightened despotism, have dreamed of a better day when wisdom will be again established upon the earth. One of our most conservative and materialistic thinkers, Joseph Wood Crutch, in his book The Modern Temper, declares that the reestablishment of the ancient mysteries is inevitable before the end of the present century. May we hazard the speculation that Pluto may prove to be the star of the mystery schools, and that the discovery of this power in the heavens heralds the awakening of the human soul to the great realities of the spiritual world? Scorpio is the house of initiation, for only when the sun is in certain degrees of this sign are candidates taken into the invisible world. It would therefore be proper for Pluto to be enthroned in the second half of this sign where the sacred degrees are located. The City of the Gods. Contrary to the generally accepted belief, the most highly initiated philosophers symbolize the eternally existing state of divinity by darkness rather than by light. In all the cosmological systems of the enlightened pagans, there was first darkness, an immeasurable extent of profundity which defied definition. From the darkness, which is the first god, proceeded light, the secondary divinity. Light moved upon the face of darkness, and through its activities the world, or embodied divinity, comes into manifestation. The radiant spirits of light set up their temporary kingdom in the midst of the darkness. But light is finite and darkness is infinite. In the last age, the night of oblivion descends once more upon the universe, and the sovereignty of the darkness is re-established. Unaware of that dimensionless goodness which abides in space, the true God of the enlightened, Aboriginal peoples conjured up a horrible monster to fill the interval that incipient reason could not bridge. Darkness became the symbol of an oppressing spirit continually plotting the destruction of light. Primitive man could not know that in the symbolic language of the sages, darkness signified not only ignorance but also that supernal wisdom which so far transcends human faculty, that its mysteries cannot be spoken or revealed through symbols or even arcanely intimated, a wisdom to be discovered only by such as through the perfection of their parts are themselves mingled with this pure and abstract state. The threefold darkness, the ever-existing reality described in the Chaldean oracles, is the symbol of all that is concealed, or that pertains to such heavenly and sacred mysteries as were necessarily obscure to the profane. Lest the unworthy accidentally discover some clue to the more vital secrets of nature, and for lack of personal integrity thereby hazard universal order, the ancient priests purposely confused the divine symbols, revealing only to the initiated the whole of the secret doctrine. Yet these same priests did not achieve secrecy by actually misstating the great truths, but rather through a false emphasis, as in the case of the great lights of the Masonic Lodge. Realizing that the greater mysteries were always veiled and that no word was spoken concerning them save to the elect, we may suspect that the absence of a light in the north or a visible door in the northern wall of the divine house is of special and most profound significance. To all Masons, writes Albert Pike, the north has immemorially been the place of darkness, and of the great lights of the lodge none is in the north. The careful phraseology which Pike uses is worthy of consideration. He dismisses the subject of the northern light without in any way compromising the integrity of the ancient tradition. The three blazing candles, through their very brilliance, attract the mind, focusing thought upon themselves with the result that the neophyte, who has not yet learned the fallacy of the evident, fascinated with their splendor, ceases to ponder, or more correctly, ignores the dark and empty angle of the north. Translated into the terms of ordinary living, we are all so fascinated by the certain creation that we are utterly oblivious to the presence of the Creator. The gods seated to the northward were invisible, veiled by their all-sufficient darkness, and were not to be subjected to the scrutiny of the profane. Their thrones were not lighted, and even their presence came to be forgotten. The Stygian night of the mysteries is impenetrable to all who have not been raised into the presence of the hidden God. To the philosopher, therefore, it becomes evident that the north is the most mysterious and secret corner of the world, and in its dark recesses are concealed many of the deepest and most priceless secrets of the soul. These must remain hidden until the master builder, having fulfilled the great work, is enabled, like the holy Nazarene, to pass through the closed wall and enter into the sovereign darkness, which is the great God. In a quest of a fuller exposition of this most sacred tradition, let us consider the ancient mythologies which constituted the mystery languages of the pagans. The old Egyptians, regarding their empire as a miniature or model of the universe, divided it into a northern and southern region, or hemisphere. These were united under the double crown of the pharaoh, the red crown of blood being assigned to the north and the white crown of milk to the south empire. The more important of their divinities were conceived of as twofold to agree with the divisions of the world, as for example the double Horus and the double Typhon. In the Orphic traditions appears the symbolism of the world egg, the upper half of which is of gold and the lower silver to signify the celestial and terrestrial spheres. The dwellings of the gods and immortals were in the superior or upper hemisphere, in fact at the most northerly point of the world egg, while to men and demons and elemental creatures was assigned the lower or inferior hemisphere, The metaphysical systems of the Tibetan Lamas, having been derived for the most part from the early Vedic traditions of India, contain a most illuminating account of the great North Polar or axis mountain of the world, the Hindu Meru. The mountain Rirab, which is the Tibetan name for Meru, is described as 84,000 miles high. It is surrounded and isolated from the inferior creation by a great ocean, and in this ocean, supported by bases of solid gold, are the four imperishable continents. From this description, it is evident that Rirab is not only the sacred mountain, but also the imperishable island, the golden cap of the goddess of the world. The whole universe itself rests in space, and as L. Austin Waddell writes, is supported upon a warp and woof of blue air woven like crossed thunderbolts. In this curious symbolic scheme, the whole universe is also surrounded by a double iron wall, 312 miles high. While such symbolism is extremely crude, it is also most vivid and reveals an understanding of certain profound philosophic truths, which every student of philosophy should thoroughly comprehend if he hopes to achieve the fullness of rational enlightenment. When the Tibetan priest makes his offerings, which are called the mandalas, or offerings to the universe, he first places in the midst of the 38 diagrams constituting the Great Wheel a handful of rice, which represents Mount Meru, which every Lama recognized as the axis of the world. Turning to the source of the Tibetan tradition, we will benefit by a consideration of the old Brahmanical accounts. In the Hindu pantheon by Moore are to be found several additional thoughts concerning the Meru or sacred mountain. Slightly paraphrased, Moore's statement is as follows. The Asuras, the opposers of light, under the dominion of Yama, the god of death, regent of the south and king of hell, symbolize the stars of the southern hemisphere, and their prince himself holds court in the Antarctic Circle. These Asuras are frequently at war with Indra, the god of the firmament, and the Suras, light spirits, whose abode is the northern hemisphere. The metropolis of the northern hemisphere is Meru, the Olympus of Indra, the celestial North Pole, allegorically represents as a mountain of gold and gems. In the Surya Siddhanta, it is written that the mountain Meru penetrates the entire core of the earth, protruding at either end. Its southern extremity is hell and the abode of demons, and its northern extremity heaven and the abode of the gods. Several writers, in describing this axis mountain of the earth, have affirmed that the Great Pyramid was designed by the ancients to symbolize the immeasurable splendor of the Great Meru. As the heavenly mountain is declared to have existed in the seventh, some say the eighth, zone of the world, it becomes the sacred island, the first of the great continents of the earth and the paradisiacal Eden from which humanity was exiled. For it was written in the ancient scriptures that mankind was driven from that mountain. Meru is the prototype of all the sacred mountains, whether termed Olympus, Asgard, or Moriah. The Shambhala, rising as upon an open lotus bud upon the triple crest of the polar mountain, is the pattern for all heavenly cities. In their philosophical geography, the initiated pagans established what they termed the high place of the earth. It was a comparatively simple matter, as the Ptolemaic concept of the geocentric solar system formed a perfect background. Above the earth were the 7 concentric circles of the planets, these in turn circumscribed by the zodiacal wall, which was called the Empyrean. It was from the substance of the stars of the Milky Way, themselves part of the wall of heaven, that the souls of incarnated men descended into matter as recorded in the Pymander of Hermes. The holy city stood on the outer surface of the Empyrean at the point corresponding to the North Pole of the sphere of the fixed stars. It was here that the 12 divinities, which were called the intellectual gods and typified the hours of the day, ruled the sphere of light as the Izzards of the sovereign sun. In like manner, upon the southern extremity of the globe of the Empyrean stood the inverted city of destruction, the evil abode of the 12 Izzards of darkness, under the dominion of Ahriman, the adversary. The world was therefore regarded as consisting of 2 empires, that of light and that of darkness, united in a sort of truce at the equator. These 2 empires continually battled against each other for the period of a great year, at the end of which time an armistice was declared. The gods and their shadows, the demons, were then reunited. After a certain period, the light was again divided from the darkness, and the war continued for another age. All this symbolism is preserved in the zodiacal mysteries, which are of a vast philosophic importance when properly understood. The modern Freemason may ask, of what use is all this archaic knowledge or belief in these enlightened days? While there are many answers to such a question, all of which are more or less relevant, it seems that one is particularly apt. If the knowledge concealed in the Masonic symbols is of no value, or of comparatively little importance, why should these symbols be so sedulously perpetuated? Why arrange the lights of a lodge in the mystic south-pointing triangle if the secret is unworthy of scholarly investigation? Thousands of years after the illustrious pagan initiates had formulated their systems and departed to their reward, St. Augustine, proselytizing a faith which he desired to be considered new, followed the ancient pagan system and divided the world into two great hemispheres, called abodes by the Egyptians and cities by the eminent church father. The superior world or city St. Augustine termed the city of God. He pictured it as a glorious community in which the blessedly enlightened dwelt together in a pure communion of spirit. The second, the inferior city or world, he designated the city of men, a community continually opposing the purpose of divine will. Human reason, reduced to the status of mere opinion by the necessary limitations of mortal perception, established in the city of men a reign of confusion and sin, of which the city of Babylon or the mythological Tower of Babel was used as an appropriate symbol. But as Babylon stood upon the plains beneath, so Nineveh raised its proud head from the crests of the towering hills, a prototype of the New Jerusalem. The old sages, not being restricted by the narrow perspective of modern literalists, never confused the outer structure of a fable with the sacred mystery which it was created to conceal. Hence, while the uninformed might visit Delphi to worship the navel stone of the earth, the wise were never deflected from the true purposes of philosophy by such superstitions as afflicting the ignorant. The double empire of the world, the mysterious two within the one, thus remained a magnificent philosophical verity, key to the whole anthropomorphic plan, until the Middle Ages, which handled abstractions roughly, corrupted the whole metaphysical system of the first philosophers and debased the city of God to a place susceptible of geographical location. The pious Christians, turning from more relevant labors, occupied themselves for several hundred years with the questionably productive task of counting the golden flagstones which paved the holy city, and in various efforts to describe the peculiarity of its architecture or the interesting features of its environs. Enthusiastic religionists declared it to be a self-evident fact that by the city of men, the envisioned seers had intended to depict the physical world in every respect, the antithesis of the heavenly community. As there could be no evil in the divine city, it seemed necessarily to follow that there could be no virtue in the human abode. Man was in dire straits indeed, for he was not only born in sin and conceived in iniquity, but the sphere into which he was ushered with such an unpropitious beginning was but one composite evil composed of an infinite number of smaller snares and pitfalls. In the midst of this distressing environment, man could only console himself by envisioning the condition of more noble creatures, who through excess of piety were privileged to inherit the Elysian fields of the pagans, then operating under Christian management. The very dangerous belief was formulated that man possessed no innate capacity for virtue, and no possibility of inherent perfection, and his only hope of glory lay in continued penance to atone, in part at least, for the calamity of his existence. Thus the misunderstood doctrine that all men were evidence of the carnal sin of the original Adam, and the sidereal universe itself but the abode of fallen spirits, for which there was no hope save heavenly grace, became the inspiration for ages of fanaticism and religious intolerance. To the same degree that religion departs from the doctrine of redemption, through individual effort, it departs not only from truth but from morality and ethics. A doctrine is most malicious which rests the destiny of mankind upon the whims of some erratic agent. Even Christianity could not succeed upon such a tenet and was forced to compromise its original position and find at least some place for works in its mechanics of salvation. The mystery schools were established as institutions for the promulgation of spiritual education. Their duty was to acquaint mankind with adequate knowledge concerning the processes of philosophic improvement. Through rational discipline and the perfection of his soul, the wise man was enabled to become one of that enlightened order which dwell together in the city of God. The adepts of the old world were bound together by a common knowledge of certain great truths. These truths, which were concerned with the noble purposes of living, were not to be found in any generally revealed system of learning. To these masters was communicated the true significance of the mountain of the mysteries, upon whose summit stands the temple of the everlasting truth, served by a hierarchy of enlightened and perfected initiates. This temple stands upon the highest point of the earth, and like the Kaaba at Mecca, is presumed to be located directly under the everlasting house of the gods in heaven, the pole star. The mystery of this is revealed in the vision of Huan Sang, who beheld a mighty pillar of pure light rising up from the earth, its lower end resting upon the dark body of matter and its capital supporting the ridgepole of Shambhala. It is our purpose to suggest an interpretation of this eternal allegory upon three planes or divisions of life. In the microcosm, or the body of man, Shambhala signifies the brain as the positive pole of the consciousness of the human spirit. Thus, the intellectual monad, or the thinker, is the regent or prince of the body, to whom is given dominion over all the functions and purposes of the outer life. At the northern or upper end of the spine, which is the axis of the body, stands the city of the intellectual regent of life. He is enthroned amidst the 12 convolutions of the brain, who are his spirits, ministers, and suras. The 4 imperishable continents over which he rules are the seed atoms, or monads, of the 4 bodies, which produce from themselves the phenomena of the sequences of incarnating personalities. As Atlas bears the heavens upon his shoulders, so the spine is the mysterious column which supports the ridgepole of Shambhala. A man of scientific propensities, in discussing the problem of electricity, declared that he regarded the brain as a transformer or transmitter of the vital electricity of life. This is in perfect harmony with the ancient traditions, for the regent of Shambhala was not the king, but the ambassador or transmitter of the king. The supreme king holds court only in the innermost recesses of the heart, where he is the seat of the subjective life. A very interesting sidelight upon the thought of rulership can be gathered from the traditions of the caravan routes. All caravans are under the control of 3 heads. First, there is the master of the caravan, who is the inclusive ruler of the whole enterprise. Then there is a second official, who is called the master of the march. The moment the caravan begins its traveling for the day, the master of the march comes into authority and remains sole dictator of its course until the encampment is made for the night. The third officer is called the master of rest and refreshment, and he has undisputed sway during all the periods of encampment. Interpreted in terms of the body, the master of the caravan signifies the heart, for it is the overseer of the whole. The master of the march is the brain, which has dominion over all the activities of the life. And the master of rest and refreshment is the generative system, or physical nature, manifesting the recuperative power of nature. The master of march, as dictator of means, has undisputed sway over the daily activity of the soul. For this reason, to the average person, the regent of activity is the true ruler, but only to the initiated does it become evident that the mind simply follows the pattern set down by the unseen one, the heart dweller. In the divine government of the earth, the polar axis becomes the great spine, and the degree of the inclination of this axis is the clue to the spiritual status of the planet. The Lord of the earth dwells in the core thereof, surrounded by 12 concentric strata, each of which is the pole of a conscious intelligence. His regent, the master of the march, the being who has control over the whole activity of the planet, holds court in the fabled Shambhala, the heavenly city that exists in the superphysical strata of the earth, held up by the mysterious lotus blossom of the pole. From the sacred Shambhala come forth the edicts of progress and purpose. Here are determined those major policies by which the direction of earthly march is decided. Simply stated, the regent of Shambhala is the mind of the earth, and as the nerves of the human body convey the impulses from the brain to all the parts and members, so the great prince is vassaled by a host of horsemen, who, receiving his instructions, hastened with them to all parts of the world. These horsemen are in reality the adepts and initiates through whom the mind of the world controls the segments of society. In the third, or solar order, we find the Shambhala located as previously intimated, upon the outer shell of the Empyrean, where it signifies the seat of universal intelligence. In all parts of creation, the creative agent is manifested by what Jacob Boehme called the two witnesses. These witnesses are the regents of mind and matter, the masters of march and rest. They are signified as competitive spirits, each plotting for supremacy, not so much for themselves as for the elements which they represent. Black magic is always represented by an inversion or perversion of power. So the black Shambhala, seated at the lower end of the great axis, is always declared to point away from the North Star, which is the sacred point by which the order of cosmos is maintained. Of course, in reality, the North Star, whose nature and position is revealed by the 7 rishis, the wise man of the Great Dipper, is again only a symbolic term to represent a divine principle, for the mystery of the North Star is too profound for the comprehension of men.